so good to see everybody today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Director Ivy coming to you live from the office, from the studio, right here at Reliable Aid Home Care Agency. We are so happy to be with y'all today, and hopefully, y'all gonna be with us today, and then I can answer some questions to you about how and what makes you eligible to be a paid caregiver. Hi, y'all. Yeah, welcome back. Yes, I am live. I want everybody to tune in. I know y'all used to seeing Mr. KC hot on the block, but guess what? Y'all getting Director Ivy now, okay? You might see that dynamic duo every now and again, but today is live, it's full effect. It's me on this motivational Monday. So, new week, new energy, new blessings, let's rock and roll. So today we are talking about, are you eligible to be a paid caregiver? And more importantly, what makes you eligible to be a paid caregiver? Now, for the average person, being a caregiver, yeah, Medicaid, or really the state, because it's not even Medicaid, these guidelines are through the state. So, what makes you eligible? A decent background check. Does it have to be squeaky clean? No. That is the preference. But, we've all lived and learned, maybe have done some things, Casey has even shared, a little bit of here and there, a little dibble and dabble, we might have had a little run in with the law, but it doesn't mean that you can't be eligible to be a paid caregiver. So, the state says you got to have a background check. Oh, and by the way, you know, give me a shout out, hashtag live, hashtag broadcast. All right. So today, yeah, the state says you got to have a background check. You got to have a health physical because you got to be in pretty good shape, because you never know what kind of situations you may run into, with your client, even if it is a family member, even though you may only be doing light things for them, you got to be ready. You got to be ready in case something happens. That X factor, we always come up with these X factors, so you never know. So you need a background check, you need a physical, you need a two-step PPD. Now, some people go in, they get the PPD, they get it read, and then they think that's over. No, you got to go back again and get it read again. And then, then the two-step, is done. You also, you need references. We need to know, what you've been out there doing. We as an agency, we don't just hire bodies. We don't just hire anybody, and I'll get into that part in a second. But again, for the state, you need references. You need a resume. You need an application. Some people think these things are trivial. Even when we were, doing our checks and balances. Oh, what do I need this for? Well, because the state says you need it. And if you ain't got it and you get hired and they get audited, I don't know, your company might not get paid, okay? So again, these are the things that make you eligible to be a paid caregiver. One, a background check. Two, a physical. Three, a two-step PPD. And then, we just need those other little things, a resume, some references, and can't be family references. We don't want the family members anyway, because you never know. Sometimes the family members might be like, I don't even like them like that. So, they might not even want to give you a good reference. But nevertheless, but more importantly, not are you eligible on paper, or are you eligible in here, in your heart? It takes a lot to be a caregiver. Caregiving is not easy. We've always, talked about, I know me personally, I've taken care of both my parents before, the Lord called them home. I've taken care of several other family members, but it is crucial. You got to have it in here. You can't just do it because you need a job. You can't just do it, because you need a paycheck. You have to do it because you love helping people. I know when people ask me, well, what does it take to get a job, at your company? I let them know. It takes patience, it takes diligence, it takes perseverance, it takes sacrifice. you know um Sometimes these caregivers, I mean, I'm sorry, not the caregivers, the clients, I don't know, they can be, they can be a little bit out of pocket, and not intentional, but they're going through things too. They're going through those aches and pains. They're going through the emotions of, maybe not being able to do the things, that they used to do for themselves. And, now they have to rely on other people, so, you got to be considerate, of that. If they're lashing out with you, you can't be, mom, don't talk to me like that. First off, if you want to clock, she ain't your mom, she's your client. So, let's keep the two separate. you know um and then, too, like, yeah, you gotta think of the other person's feelings. Put yourself, in their shoes. Like us, subscribe to us if you haven't already. We love to hear from you guys. But yeah, you gotta exercise a lot of patience, y'all. People just don't, understand. They get into it thinking, they're going to get an extra paycheck, they're going to get a paycheck for sitting at home. Again, if they're family caregivers, we have a lot of family caregivers, but we make sure that they stay on point. We go out there, we check in, and if I'm doing the assessment, I let the client know. It doesn't matter if it's your son, your daughter, your granddaughter, your mother, brother, sister, or cousin. Guess what? If they're not doing a good job for you, then we're going to find you somebody that wants to do a good job for you. It ain't about, trying to share a paycheck and all these little get around schemes. We ain't about that life. Y'all, we are here to make a difference in the lives of others. So if you're considering being a family caregiver, if you're considering being a caregiver, at all, those are a few key things, that you want to think about. Hashtag live. If you got any questions out there for me, Director Ivy is in the building today. And I'm here. I'm here for you guys. We understand the struggle. The struggle is real. I think probably almost everybody in my office, is a caregiver currently or has been a caregiver. So we understand. We don't just have empathy, for y'all. We sympathize, with you guys, because we've been battered and bruised, in our day. Sometimes the conversation, with your client gets a little bit spicy, and then they're like, I don't want them as my client, as my caregiver anymore. You just have to learn, to not take that in. Don't take it personal. It's easy to, lash back out and, think ain't nobody going to talk to me like that. But that's why, with reliable aid, specifically, may not, be with any other agency that you may have dealt with, or any other holiday agency that you may have heard about. We talk to you guys. We let y'all know, hey, you might come across this, or, hey, you might come across that. So, we put it all out there. We let you know what the client is like, their likes and dislikes, so because we don't want to add on no triggers. So again, it is very important when you're thinking about being a paid caregiver, a caregiver in general, but definitely, when you're getting paid, you're getting paid to do a job. So it's no different if you're out there and you're in the banking system. You're paid to do a job. So you may get a customer that comes up to you, and they ain't so pleasant, but you just can't give everybody the business, because you feel offended. There's a protocol, there's processes. We come on in, we step in. We're always happy to come on out there and redirect, intervene. Our wellness team, calls you, they come on out. We're here to help you. But it is so, you guys, I cannot emphasize it enough, the importance, of deciding whether or not being a caregiver is a good fit for you. Being in healthcare in general, is challenging. Nobody likes to admit it. People may have the credentials for it, but if you ain't got it in here, it's going to reflect, out there. So, hashtag live, hashtag rebroadcast. I want to hear from you guys. If you have any questions or concerns, if you thought about being a caregiver, if you are a caregiver, and you're experiencing challenges, we either going to have something else coming up, for you guys, specifically for, the clients and the caregivers, just to get it out. Because, you guys need to be heard. You guys get frustrated too, so we want to be able to help everybody, and the people that want to be helped. We're not going to be able to help everybody. We have the desire to, but whether or not it'll actually happen, we'll see, because the people that need the help have to really accept it, as well. And it's even hard to accept for a client that they even need a caregiver. So if you have somebody in mind, if you know that it's in your heart and you really want to be a caregiver, you got a family member that's on Medicaid, we always talk about, how to get into the LTSS program, how to get, connected with reliable aid. You can call us up, 302-689-3240. We happy to come on, hey, hey, hey. We happy to come on and help get you started, so but we just need to hear, from you. And like I said, it's just important that we know that you are really committed to even being, a caregiver. Because don't call us, because we're gonna call you out. If you ain't ready for it, we're gonna call you out. Hey, how are you today? Absolutely, absolutely good to see you. Likewise, I am here for you guys today. So, come on with the questions. What you got for me today? It's Motivation Monday. We got new goals, new energy, new week blessings. We got all kinds of stuff going on. So, I want to hear from y'all. I want to hear what you're thinking. I want to hear what makes you, fit to be a caregiver other than your credentials, because the credentials are important, because they can make or break a situation as well. At the end of the day, the state has the final say. That's why we always start, with the background check. Because if the background check don't come right, ain't no need to get nothing else done. I'm sorry to say, as much as we'd like to, we used to have a little bit more flexibility. Nah, the state said we ain't about that life, because they got to be accountable too, so we understand it, we want, we want to help everybody, sometimes those challenges, pose those situations where, but even in that, I know we have quite a few, well, not quite a few, but we got maybe a handful, that have had, records, male and female, you know, and they were like, I don't, I don't want to get this background check done. I got this and I got that, but if it's meant for you, then it'll happen. I mean, I don't know, unless you some kind of, I don't know, because I don't be judging. I ain't about that life. But unless you got something serious, hola, unless you got something serious on your record, you never know. So none beats a failure but a try, but if it's in reliable age power, if it's in Director Ivy's power, if it's in KC's power, we're going to see to it that you hop up on the team, and that you go out there and you make it happen. You give it all you got. We believe in second chances. Not everybody, gets a second chance. Some people are so hard on themselves, they don't think they deserve a second chance. But y'all know I'm a believer. So, we serve a God of a second, third, fourth, fifth, and 10th chance, okay? So, but yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But think about yourself, and if you are a caregiver, think about how you want to be treated. We have clients, not caregivers, but we have clients in their late 20s, early 30s. The program itself is not just for the senior population, it's not just for the retired or the elderly. These are people that have had real life, issues, some of it from birth, some of it. self-inflicted, some of it car accidents. We get, we have people that have all kinds of diagnoses, that can qualify you, to be on service, but if you're considering, being a caregiver, and you think about, what makes you a good fit, or, you got a client that's a good fit, we gotta think about some things. Y'all, I got a question, going on up here. And it says, you know, at Mr. Kayan Church, Second Street Investor 230, the first company I had didn't want to take care of my people because of my record, and I already had a pardon from Governor Jack Markell. Now, ain't that the foolery, you know? Now, if you got a pardon, I don't even know how they can say no, because that, to me, I would consider that to be discrimination. But, again, I don't make the laws, and maybe even though the state says that it's okay, your actual employer might think that it's not okay. Your employer, can have some stipulations or some rules, within that. But, if it didn't work out for that, then guess what? It wasn't the right company for you anyway. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It probably was not the right company for you, but it doesn't mean that you stop. If it's your passion, if that's really what you have a heart to do, you have a heart for people, then yeah, don't let that, don't let one monkey stop no show, So again, look for someplace else, I'm just saying, I'm just saying, you want it right and tight, you want honesty, you want transparency, you want a company that wants to see you strive and do well, clients and caregivers, we're holistic, we want everybody to succeed, then yeah, you know what side to come on over to. But again, before you do that, just be sure that being a caregiver is what you want to do. Before you even go through all of this, if you want to be a caregiver, and you got a client, even a family caregiver, and you got a client in mind, start caring for that client right now. You probably already doing it. But when you get a company in mind, the company has to make sure that certain things, are being done. Care plans. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I understand that holiday company. Yeah, foolery, absolute foolery. But again, that's why, when you came on over here, you're rolling with the best. Absolutely. We just love you guys. We're here for our whole team. We're not just dictators. We don't just sit behind the desk and, tell other people what to go out there and do. We don't tell them how to be caregivers. We show them, how to be caregivers. Because, some people, all of those good qualities may be innate, in them, but they may not know how to cook. I had somebody, yeah, she didn't know how to scramble up some eggs, and the client was not happy. I say, hey, we got all this stuff going on. We got all this technology these days. We can show you how to cook. We can show you how to clean. We can even show you how to, be a little more active or interactive, with the client, because some clients, like activity. They like stimulation. And then you got other clients that, yeah, do what you do, and, just chill out, for the rest of the day. We can show you, give you guidance, give you structure, give you tools, give you lessons on all of those things, is anything pertaining to the care plan. But when it comes to, you being eligible, and really your desire, and whether or not it's meant for you to be a caregiver, we can't teach that. You have to know that within yourself. And if you're not honest with yourself, and you go on out there, and test the waters, it could possibly not come out good for you, which wouldn't be good. But if you're thinking about the client, which is where it starts, it could really turn out not to be so good, with the client. And if you're a family caregiver, sometimes, you start like this, and, then, a lot of times it just doesn't work out good. And, first and foremost, you always, want to be family. We're family here. You come rock with us, you family too. So we want to make sure all our family, succeeds, but some of that success does rely on you as the caregiver. So what did we learn today? We learned a few things, what it takes to be eligible, for a caregiver. If you learned something today, you can give us a call, 302-689-3240. If you forgot something, you can always hashtag rebroadcast, or if you're watching me live right now, hashtag live, but if you need any suggestions, on anything, feel free to call us up. We love to talk and chat, you know, and bust it up with you, why we getting, you eligible to be a paid caregiver. If your client's not in the long-term care program, through Medicaid with Delaware First, AmeriHealth, or Highmark Health Options, we can get them rocking and rolling too. We one-stop shop up around here, okay? Absolutely. If you don't know, you better ask somebody. That's all I'm saying, y'all. Absolutely, absolutely. I've been enjoying, talking to y'all, today. My road dog, he was like, what you gonna do? You gonna put up and shut up, basically. I need to be on there with you today. Or, you rolling solo. And I was like, I'm rolling solo, I can do this, so I love talking to people. I love helping people. I love connecting with people. We get people that come on that may not even be from the area. We can't help them, specifically, so even if you on, and you're not from the area, hashtag wherever it is you viewing me from. So we might can't help you here, although Medicaid, because Medicaid is non-transferable from state to state, but the guidelines and the principles, should pretty much, be the same. So, but like I said, again, some employers, have their own little guidelines within the guidelines, because, we just want to make sure that, we doing everybody, a good service, not a disservice, but a good service. So, absolutely, absolutely. So I don't know, y'all. Kind of when you're talking about being a paid caregiver, it ain't a whole lot to it. We can talk for hours about, certain situations that, how to become eligible, as a client, but as a caregiver, it's pretty cut and dry, because you either got it, or you don't. And even if you get into it and you realize, "Hmm, maybe this ain't for me. Maybe I ain't really cut out." Then yeah, be honest with yourself and be honest, with your client, to say, hey, maybe it's in the best interest if I find you somebody else. I've had to tell several clients, throughout the years, that yeah, maybe, that person should just be your son or your daughter, or your grandson or your granddaughter, whoever the family member is, because everything ain't for everybody, but if you got it in your heart and you love helping people, you know and you show those fruits of the spirit, love, kindness, caring, compassion, forgiveness, because whoo, boy, them clients, sometimes I told you they can be real spicy, and they might say something to you like, oh, wait a minute, I don't even know where that came from, but charge it to their head and not their heart. They got emotions too. So it is just very important, you guys. I just can't stress it enough. And even though it's, oh, I've been doing this, for a long time, you might have been being a caregiver out there in the community, but never actually, being one for a family member. It can sometimes take on a different, spin, because as the caregiver, we're limited. You got to follow a care plan, but if your daughter, also, or the son, or whatever the relation is, you're going to want that family member to try to do everything it is that they can to get better, but you can't force them, not when you on the clock. So again, that's where, you got to utilize those boundaries. So, there are a few things that need to come into play, when you're considering, being a family caregiver, being a caregiver, in general. But, if you've been tuning into the Reliable Aid broadcast, You know what, Mr. KC brings, to the table. He always talks about, how to get into the program, and, even are you eligible, to be a caregiver, so y'all know what time it is. It's just up to you to decide whether or not the time is right. Timing is everything. You might be, on the verge of retiring, but still, need a couple dollars, still want to be active, still want to make the difference in the life of somebody else, so yeah, that could be, you could be a good fit. And if you've been doing it, if you at home and you've been, caregiving for somebody anyway, and not being compensated, you might be a good fit. So call 302-689-3240. Let us know what's going on in your life. We can let you know. Yeah, we got you. Or hold on, you might have to do one or two of things first, and then we got you. But nevertheless, yeah, we got you. We got you. We say what we mean, and we mean what we say. So I don't know, y'all. It's kind of quiet on this, motivating Monday. I'm looking for all the commentary, I'm looking for questions. I'm looking for, hey, I don't know. Y'all got any job openings? We always looking for good, qualified, people that want to lead, by example, that, don't just want to do the basics, that, want to really make a difference in somebody's life. So, if you here in Delaware, or you in the surrounding area, and you looking for, a good agency, yeah, give us a call, 302-689-3240. Let them know how you came to find out about us. I was on live, and I saw, I think I saw, I saw Director Ivy doing her thing today solo, and I said, okay, yes, yes, y'all. Well, I'm all about, that positive energy, if y'all ain't figured it out. you know um so today, one of the things, I send out, motivating quotes, to my team. I try to be consistent and do it every day. I might fall short a day or two, but I do try to send it every day, to get their day started, because sometimes we wake up to challenges. We wake up to text messages, we wake up to phone calls, we wake up to all kinds of emails, but we don't let it stop, we don't let it stop us. But one of the things, that it talked about today was success doesn't come from what you do occasionally. It comes from what you do consistently. Show up, level up, and never give up. How about that? Does that mean anything to y'all? Hashtag that. Hashtag level up. Hashtag show up. Hashtag never give up. Because, yeah, that should make a difference, to you. And then the other thing says, you are stronger than you think, braver than you feel, and capable of more than you imagine. This Monday is your fresh start. Own it. Ow. Hashtag own it. Hashtag live. Hashtag rebroadcast. Absolutely. Let's own it. If you want to be a caregiver, own that thing. You know what I mean? If you ain't in the state of Delaware and want to come rock and roll with us, own that thing in your state. Okay? Because if you have that within you, then don't waste your talents, don't waste your gifts, on something that is maybe not meant for you to do, that you may not even be fulfilled, and you may not feel fulfilled, at the end of your workday. It's just like, you know what I mean? Yeah, I went in and did my thing, and I got my paycheck, and you know what I mean, I'm going home. But there's nothing more fulfilling than enjoying or having a career that you love, that you have a passion for, that you have a desire for, from a spiritual perspective, what God has called you to be, so operate in that gift, what I mean? Show up and show out, show the world what you're working with, so I love you guys. I am not going to keep y'all today. I don't know. I'm looking for some more chatter, chit chat tomorrow, because we onward and upwards. So I thank you guys. I wish you well. Peace and good night.